Homo instrumentalis is not going to survive the power of his own artifacts unless he makes a major step towards a real Homo sapiens. So that's the quintessential challenge of our epoch, to enable the Homo to survive his own instruments. My name is Albrecht von Müller. I'm a philosopher by training. I'm working on two fields. One is how thinking works, the other is how time works. And I taught philosophy for many decades at the University of Munich, but my main occupation is to study how the human brain copes with complexity and how we can support it in this regard. So one of the key challenges we face in an increasingly complex world is to support and foster the further development of our innate thinking skills. Both is important. The support part helps us when we are actually confronted with a challenge, maybe a dangerous challenge like a political crisis. And the fostering of the further development is important so that we do not replace our innate operations like with a calculator and then we stop calculating ourselves, but that we really develop our still very early thinking skills. You can imagine human thinking at present as an early beta release of evolution. Human thinking came very, very late in the overall course of evolution, and therefore I think there's enormous room for improvement, and that's also one of the reasons why I'm optimistic that we might develop our thinking capabilities in a way that we can survive our enormous instrumental power. So to put that in a metaphor, Homo instrumentalis is not going to survive the power of his own artifacts unless he makes a major step towards a real Homo sapiens. And in a way, this situation in which we are has wonderfully been described in a poem by Goethe, the famous Zauberlehrling, where the Zauberlehrling, the sorcerer's apprentice, is able to unleash enormous powers, but not able to control them. And the only big difference today is that we don't have a master in the background who could come to help us. We have to do it ourselves. And that's the huge challenge. We have to make intentionally the step from a Homo instrumentalis to a sapiens. And the only reason for hope in this regard is that the individual life of a person who tries to do that is getting much deeper, richer, and more meaningful. So there's an individual motivation for everybody to try to do that step. And if that were not the case, I would be very pessimistic. There are essentially three big classes of means to support and to foster the unfolding of cognitive skills. And the first one is very precise thinking, and there the visualization of reasoning process is an enormous help and support in the sense of developing skills, because we gain a level of transparency and of understanding which we usually don't have. Thinking, interestingly enough, is like good spectacles. We see through them, we don't see them. And the same applies to thinking. We are usually not aware that and how we think. And allowing the people to be aware of how they think, how they interrelate arguments, how they zoom in, zoom out, and all these operations is an enormous improvement of their thinking skills. So a visual reasoning language, as we developed, which de-aggregates complex reasoning in its individual steps, is a very powerful means to support the quality in the sense of precision, speed, innovativeness, communicability of thinking. So that's the first block, supporting the actual quality of the thinking process by visualizing it. The second big challenge is today to navigate rapidly expanding knowledge spaces. And this can be done by these topicules where you visualize the entire knowledge space and then allow the user to steer in it, zoom out, and really utilize it in a much richer form than today, where we usually have, still coming from the purely sequential culture of thinking, due to the sequential structure of language. So we have a book and one thing comes after the other, etc., etc. These knowledge spaces are much more adequate because knowledge inherently has a spatial characteristic and you want to maneuver in that space. And the third big block in terms of supporting and fostering the development of thinking skills is the richness and the thesaurus of thought patterns that a person has at her or his disposal. What do I mean by that? A thought pattern is a way how to arrange arguments around a kind of shaping structure. And we have very different thought patterns in different disciplines. So a biologist is thinking in a different manner and with different thought patterns than a physicist, than a linguist, than a historian, etc. And the richness of our library of thought patterns is quintessential for being able to really appreciate novel, complex situations. And specifically making the library of thought patterns that are available to a person, making that bigger is enormously powerful and helps for science, helps for practical problem solving, etc., etc. So the richness of the library of thought patterns is something that is not trained in universities at all at present, but enormously powerful. It's the opposite of what we see today often with lots of our PhD students, that they become very, very good in a very, very narrow field. But then usually that goes hand in hand with only a rather limited number of thought patterns. And therefore we developed a postdoc master program in which we intentionally expand this library of thought patterns. And the elementary kind of survival set which we start to teach there is that we, from 4 big fields in science, namely structural sciences with mathematics, physics and informatics, life sciences, especially with evolutionary biology, developmental biology, medicine, etc. Then social sciences, and the last cluster is humanities with the dominant role of philosophy. From all these 4 fields, we take most relevant thought patterns and teach them in that course and enable people in this way to use them as prisms when they're confronted with something, a challenge they haven't seen before. And that's extremely powerful and a completely novel form, because today, really outstanding thinking is at best a byproduct of filling in content in the various fields. And I think that's poor, yeah? Because when dealing with a more and more complex world, it's so important that we really have advanced cognitive skills, and this rich library of thought patterns is a quintessential element in that regard.